Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Aditi Mayer, and I'm going to be your host today. We have quite the global audience from my morning here in LA to the folks in Europe to the folks in India. So I want to welcome you all today. I want to start by introducing State of Fashion. So, State of Fashion is an international fashion platform that connects pioneers in the fashion industry, from research and business to design, and helps connect all of these ideas. They have a biannual where they have discussion programs, labs for design models, research, exhibitions, and publications. And amid this time of COVID, they have begun a new series called This is an Intervention. And This is an Intervention is a newly launched digital program, and it's about bringing together nuanced ideas about the fashion industry. How do we go forward from where we've been? How do we learn from our histories? And how can we reimagine a fashion industry that is regenerative for all? So, throughout this discussion, feel free to leave any questions you might have in the chat below. There is, I'm not sure if there's a Q&A feature, so you can go ahead and leave it in the chat. And at the end of the discussion, I will go ahead and call on those questions. If you want to ask your question personally, make a note of that, and I will note that as well. So today's conversation is going to be exploring the idea of decolonial approaches to land, labor, and the fashion industry, specifically situated in the context of India. As someone who has been in the sustainable fashion space for quite some time now and is of South Asian descent, I often think about the ways that, the impacts of colonialism on India's industry still continue today. And so we often see colonialism as this distant abstraction of the past. But when I speak of colonial mentalities or colonial practice in the fashion industry, it's about a system that is rooted in the extraction and exploitation of resources, whether that's natural resources or labor as the means for infinite success and infinite financial gain. So, when we have this basis that we frame our business model on, we need to really reorient that and decolonize that understanding. And so to start, I would love to have each of my panelists introduce themselves. First, we have Nishanth Chopra of Oshadi Collective. We have Rupsi Garg of Kheti Virisat Mission. And lastly, we have Dr. Vandana Shiva. So I am going to ask my lovely panelists to go ahead and start their videos. And Nishanth, if you want to start by introducing yourself, that would be great.
Hi, Aditi. My name is Nishanth Chopra, and I'm founder of Oshadi. I started Oshadi about 4 or 5 years ago when I got back from finishing my graduation. I joined my family-run textile business, and I just realized that mechanized way of doing things was not enticing for me. And I used to travel to a lot of villages while growing up, and I just realized that I had a lot of time to make a small impact
Oh, it looks like
that I
Nishanth
found
has frozen.
a piece working with it. Can you hear me good? Is it okay now? All right. So about when I worked for my dad's factory, my family-run factory, I just realized things were not okay. The way the system was, I learned from a lot of other textile factories around. I come from a textile hub. So I just wanted to see if there's a way to do things differently. I always complain about things not being right. And I'm really young. I was really young back, like I was 22, and I realized I had a lot of time to make a small impact just the way I can. So we started a women's wear brand just to see, just to connect the artisan community locally with more international market. And as that happened, I got really intrigued by the supply chain, how things were not right on every level, like the materials, the composition, the pay structure, the payroll, the environment, the dyes, everything. So we started one step at a time. We started working with the natural dyeing techniques. We started working with the materials. We are working with the artisans directly, not just sourcing from them, but just working with them to find better solutions, more environment friendly solutions. A lot of people, what they do is they work with like a dyeing factory or like a small artisan community, and they just impose things. A lot of the brands are like, hey, do you have like a God certificate? Or like, hey, we only work with you if you have a God certificate. We didn't take that approach. we started working with artisans directly, and we told them, hey, this is a solution, and we are going to bring in dyes, and you can adopt these dyes even if you don't want it to adopt like for everything you do. But let's start somewhere just with our work, and then if you keep if you like working that way, and then you can expand it to your other clientele. And we went all the way back to the weaving, and we just we realized, like, just being around the villages. I watched a movie called Merku Thodachi Malai, and it's a Tamil movie. It's about this vicious circle of poverty which the farmers are caught up in by these chemical companies, pesticides company. They give them a loan, and they just want more and more of things, and they sell more and more on loan, and the farmers can't pay back, and they end up selling their lands. And I just thought it was so true. And I thought, like, it's 2020, and how can the world be in such a crazy, like, inhuman, it can run in such an inhuman way. So just very next day, I got in touch. I was listening to a podcast. I heard of Rebecca Burgess from Fiber Shed, and I realized the things she was speaking about with the Fiber Shed, that's something in line like with what we were doing. And I approached her to see if she could give us a grant or support us in a way, because at that time, like at 22, I don't really have funds, and she kind of helped us. She gave us a grant and connected us with our brand partners, Christy Dawn, and we started the first 4-acre project, a regenerative farm project, which is basically like traditional ancient Indian farming techniques. So I used to, there was a guru, South Indian guru called Namalwar. I used to attend a lot of workshops. He's no more, but his workshops still continue. And I went to a lot of his workshops. I adopted those practices, and then I realized, hey, this was the regenerative farming thing. So now we have like a complete seed to sow supply chain where we work with, and yeah, here we are as a collective.
Amazing. Thank you, Nishanth. I'm excited to dive in deeper of your personal story. Next, Dr. Shiva, would you mind giving us a brief intro of who you are and your work?
Well, I did an MSc in particle physics honors in Punjab University when it was a peaceful and prosperous Punjab in the early 70s. And then I went to Canada to do a PhD in the foundations of quantum theory, and worked for a while on interdisciplinary research, worked for a while on foundations of quantum theory. Then I realized that the narrative didn't hang together. The idea that the more science technology we have, the less poverty we'll have. I saw poverty grow, the more industrialization there was. And first I worked in the Indian Institute of Management in Bangalore to try and solve this puzzle on science and technology, and then created an independent research foundation. My mother gifted me her cowshed, which is where I'm sitting. This is where I was locked down. And it's so nice to be kind of back where my life was 40 years ago. And it was during this period I was working for the United Nations University on a program on peace and global transformation, conflicts over resources. And 84 happened in Punjab. And I said to the UNU, I got to study this as part of the conflict. What are the rules? This doesn't make sense. The narrative being told that it's about religion makes no sense, because I didn't tell me it's about water, it's about prices. And so I did a study on the violence of the Green Revolution, and that book, which is out from University of Kentucky in the United States, and from Natraj in India and many other publishers. I did that book and then took a pledge. I'm going to commit myself to nonviolent farming, with no idea at all about where it will take me. But I discovered then ecological agriculture, organic farming, all the scientific principles. And 3 years later, I find at a meeting on biotechnology that the chemical companies, the Monsantos and Ciba-Geigys, who are now the Syngentas, are saying we're not making enough money selling poisons, we got to own the seed. And they talked about, this was 1987, they talked about genetic engineering being the route to patenting, which they would impose globally under the WTO trade-related intellectual property rights. So no farmer could ever save seeds again. And I said, A, you don't invent the seed, you can't have a patent. 2, you're criminalizing farmers for their duty. So I started Navdanya I started seed saving in 87, but became an entity called Navdanya, which means 9 seeds, in 1991. And that's what I've been doing, seed saving. And because Monsanto's BT cotton introduced totally illegally. I sued them in 1999, 98, they came in illegally. I sued them in the Supreme Court. They couldn't sell commercially for 4 more years. And in that period, I watched cotton shifting from a mixed crop with jowar and bajri in Vidarbha and mixed crop everywhere into BT cotton monocultures. And I watched the suicide start. And that's when I entered the seed saving. I mean, we've been doing seed saving on food crops, but then I started seed saving of cotton. And we've now, since this was in the mid 2000s, and every year we used to bring out this report called Seeds of Suicide, connecting debt, BT cotton, and farmer suicides. And the beautiful thing is, since that time, besides all the seed saving we've done, we've created community seed banks in Vidarbha, which is the epicenter of farmer suicides. It's also where Gandhi started his ashram Sevagram. And we work with the Gandhian ashrams on a fiber of freedom project. My work on Navdanya was inspired by the fact that Gandhi had pulled out a spinning wheel to fight the British Empire. And I thought very hard, what would be the spinning wheel of today? And I said, the seed. The seed is today's spinning wheel. So in a way, it came full circle, where we connected back to the charkha and the spinning wheel of the Gandhi ashrams of Vidarbha. We do organic cotton seeds, we distribute them. We train farmers to do organic cotton. That organic cotton goes to the Gandhi ashrams, who then hand spin, hand weave, and vegetable dye the fibers of freedom. Now, of course, there's more work to be done, not only because the farmers' crisis is deeper, but the instrumentalizing and structuring of the crisis is more accelerated. And also, sadly, you know, I call them the poison cartel, the guys who came out of Hitler's labs, the IG Farben gang. All they know is how to kill people and how to kill insects and how to kill species and make money while doing it. And now they want a farming without farmers. And so that's my next work, you know, to defend the farmers, not just in their justice, but to defend farmers as not becoming a species that goes extinct.
Amazing. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. And it's so wonderful to hear that your journey started in the beautiful Punjab, which leads us to Rupsi Garg, who is the Associate Director of Kheti Virisat Mission. Rupsi, can you give us a brief overview of your work?
Good evening, everyone. My name is Rupsi Garg. I am from Punjab, India, and I studied biotechnology. I passed BTech in 2011 from Kurukshetra University, Haryana. And after that, I went to CCMB, Center for Cellular and Molecular Biology. It's a CSIR lab in Hyderabad. And I worked there for 3 years as a junior research fellow. But while working there, I realized that I don't want to continue and work in lab. I want to do something else. So that something else was at the grassroots level in the social sector. And I left CCMB. After that, I joined Ajim Premji University. It's in Bangalore. And I studied Masters in Development. So while I was studying in APU, I read about Green Revolution and how it has destroyed Punjab's ecology, Punjab's people's health, environmental health. And after that, I read Dr. Shiva's book called Monocultures of the Mind. So it moved me, and I am also a Punjabi. So it made me think what is happening in Punjab. And I was away from home for 7-8 years. And in the meantime, I started reading Mahatma Gandhi ji. And his first book that I read was Village Republic, Gram Swaraj. So in that, he talks about local production, local consumption, self-sufficiency. So he talks about khadi, he talks about charkha, and coincidentally, one of my friends went to Navdarshana. It's a community in Tamil Nadu. They do farming, they do workshops on eco-friendly and sustainable practices. And she attended a workshop by Madhavji on charkha. It was a spinning workshop, and she brought that charkha to the hostel. So I saw her doing that spinning, and I asked her if she can teach me. Then she said, there is nothing to teach in it. You have to practice it yourself. Then she told me a little bit about the charkha, and I started doing it. When I did it, so I could make that connect what I read in Village Republic and other writings of Gandhiji. So it became a habit, and I started spinning regularly. So then I got to know about Kheti Virasat Mission in Punjab. After third semester in second year in APU, we have a field component. So we have to do a field project. I came here, I worked with farmers, organic farmers, chemical farmers, and I worked on a farm myself. And I felt very good because I could make a connect with people around, language, culture, food habits, and so many other things as well. And at that time, I decided to join Kheti Virasat Mission. I didn't take any campus placement. And after completing the post-graduation in 2018, I came to KVM. And since last 2.5 years, I'm here. And after coming here also, I got organic cotton, desi cotton, because Kheti Virasat Mission has been promoting organic farming since last 15-20 years. So there are a good number of farmers who do desi cotton, short staple organic cotton. And then we have women who do its hand spinning. So here also I found charkha, and I could make that connect. And then we started exploring in the villages, and we tried to revive this full value chain from cotton to yarn to fabric and other traditional art and crafts also. So we have an initiative called Trinjan, and Trinjan is a Punjabi word. It symbolizes the sisterhood and the connection that we have with each other, with our environment, with our culture. So we have about 250 to 300 artisans associated with us, and they are working in different villages. We are working in 3 districts, Faridkot, Barnala, and Muktsar. And I see a huge possibility in it. It is not just about the art, it's a way of living, and it tells you what we are actually.
Perfect. Thank you, Rupsi.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to stop you there because I want to dive deeper into Trinjan and all your work throughout as we go through this panel. All of you touched on such important touch points in history, as well as what's happening currently within the landscape of India, from the Green Revolution to the modern farmer bills. But I want to take a step back and rewind a bit. And I want to talk about the beginnings of this shift where we had colonization. And in 1664, the East India Company was created. And one of the major goals was to subdue India's textile economy. And so there was a plan, a systemic plan created to subdue the Indian farmer and make the switch from subsistence farming to cotton crop. And this was a very pivotal point. Not only would this eventually subject farmers to a cycle of interest-laden debt, it would also diminish the food supply. India was to constantly supply the British mills with cotton, being only the exporter of raw material, only to be sold that cotton back at a premium, which left our own spinners and weavers unable to afford that cotton. Britain became this workshop of the world, and especially during the 19th century, the US and British cotton relationship, which was predicated on the use of slave labor in America, also further diminished India's textile economy. So with that framing in mind, Dr. Shiva, you have said that the rupture of oneness with the earth was a very deep construct and impact of colonialism. So we know this to be true when it comes to the modes of agriculture and how our relationship with land and labor is so predicated on output, output, output. So I'd love to know, how do you think colonialism has affected our modern day understanding of both land and labor?
So yeah, the East India Company, as the name tells you, was created to conquer India, because India at that time was 25% of the world economy. We were the world economy, and we were the traders of the world for spices and textiles. And given that your platform is a fashion platform, literally till globalization. For me, the poorest woman in the poorest village was walking fashion, because we'd managed after independence to bring textiles back. Textile, hand spinning and hand weaving had been totally crushed. And I want to read you a quote from my book, The Violence of the Green Revolution, about the state that the East India Company chartered by Queen Elizabeth in December 1600. 300 merchant adventurers, gangsters of Europe got together, just like today the gangsters get together to create companies. And of course, hijacked the entire spice trade, totally colonized the land, and I'll come to that, but because you're a fashion group. 1864, it is evident that the whole population must be far nearer a state of pristine nudity than ever before. This is India of the textiles. Every poor person stints himself to an inconceivable degree in his clothing and every purpose to which cotton is applied. He wears his turban and breechcloth to rags, dispenses with his body clothing, and denies himself his annual renewal. So we were taken from the biggest economy of the world to one of the poorest, 2% of the world economy by the British left. How did colonialism change land and labor? We never believed in property in land. This is Sabhi Bhumi Gopal ki dharti maa. Even now at the farmers' protest, they keep talking about the mother as, or the soil as their mother, and what they're fighting for is their bond with her. So the British, colonialism was a mega land grab. Not just in India. The peasant lands were taken and became colonial lands. And then the British appointed zamindars. And the brilliant, and this is something you should look at, we have 2 volumes of the ecological history of food and farming, because in the Northwest provinces, as it was called, the farmers' protest started immediately with this extraction of lagan, the rent. And I have links to Sir Chotu Ram, who was the governor at that time of the Northwestern provinces. But the farmers protesting today were farmers who fought against the British zamindari and stayed owner cultivators. They were never working for landlords or were never landlords, hiring other labor. But the East India was turned to zamindari, was pushed to famines. And so the land relationship was not totally alienated, and the Land Alienation Act of Northwestern provinces kept the Punjab farmer a proud, independent farmer, which is why they've risen again and again and again. So they made land their property and collected rents called lagan. $45 trillion was transferred by the British. Where did the lagan come from? From the farmers. What was this 45 trillion of wealth transferred to England? The creativity, productivity of the land and the creativity and productivity of the farmer. 45 trillion of this wealth was transferred by the colonial system. And the peasants who created that wealth were pushed to famine, 60 million famine deaths during the British period. Of course, they then created the fabric of theorizing what science is Bacon, what property is Locke, what politics is Hobbes. I mean, I want to do a bonfire of these big white men's lies because they brainwashed so many generations of people. And Adam Smith writes this book on the wealth of nations, which is really about the theft from nations. And he talks about it being in our DNA to be greedy and take away from others. No, it's in our DNA to protect the earth, share. Look at the langars on the streets where the farmers are protesting, the giving of food. This is not about grabbing, it's about giving. So how was land changed? It was turned into property, but of the colonizer. And the original non-prop, they were custodians. They were left destitute. But land was also turned into an inert dead matter. And all the theorizing of the Bacons of that time was the earth is dead matter. So not only did it take life, take away resources of the presence, it took away life from the land. And my life's work for the last so many decades, 50 years now, has been to show how capitalist patriarchy totally redefined our relationships with the earth and our perception of ourselves. Our bodies were also turned into inert raw material. And our only work was as slaves. But if you think, and the narrative that was built, it was the mills of Lancashire and Manchester that created the wealth of England. No, they were colonizing 200 years before those mills came. And their empire was an empire of cotton, for which they grabbed all of the land of the indigenous people of the Americas, turned it into cotton plantations. But because it was so much, they then had to capture Africans and slaves and do tell the Black Lives Matter movement that it is time to create a global unity against colonialism. It is not just a problem of one group of people on one piece of land. It's a global problem. And we are connected through cotton being turned from the thread of prosperity to a thread of slavery. In terms of labor, this, I think, is the big deconstruction that has to be done, the decolonization of work. The earth was reduced to land as an inert input, and we were reduced to labor as a commodity to be sold. I'm not going to go into depth because so much has been written about alienation of labor, about extraction of surplus value, the entire edifice of inequality, exploitation, extraction, both from the earth and from people. And sadly, because we've inherited those definitions as if they are Bibles written by Christ himself or Moses, 10 Commandments, people still think within those categories. So people are taking it as inevitable. Even though Gandhi totally challenged the idea of industrialization with the spinning wheel, people are taking it as inevitable that artificial intelligence and robotics is going to destroy all work and 99% humanity will be useless. Now is the time for the spinning wheel in every hand, the seed in every hand. Decolonization means the colonizers' agenda must be challenged with another imagination.
Incredibly powerful, Dr. Shiva. And I love the way you talk about those interlinked oppressions, from the forced removal of indigenous folks in the Americas, enslaved Africans, to what was happening in India during this time of the British Raj. I also love the idea of this discord of seeing humans. Once we are nature, we weren't nature, we are nature, but this discord that created this human nature divide was also key to all of this. You concluded on the idea of the charkha and the spinning wheel. And for those that are not familiar, during the fight for independence against the British Raj, the key tool of resistance became khadi. And so Rupsi, I know your work deals a lot with the charkha and khadi. So I would love if you could give us a brief history on how khadi and the charkha was used as a tool of resistance. What did that look like exactly?
Yeah, so for me, charkha is not just making yarn out of cotton. It's a way of living, and it tells you about your lifestyle, what values we inherit through charkha. As the charkha keeps revolving, our life is also revolving around it. And it talks about the cultural associations that we have among human beings and with our environment, our physical environment, our ecological environment, all these things. So if I go to villages these days, I can see those connecting links. There are farmers, there are different kinds of artisans, they are spinners, they are weavers, they are blacksmithers, they are carpenters. So village as a unit, and how these different chains, these different links are connected to each other. They are dependent on each other, but still they have their own independence. So during British Raj, this khadi is not just about the fabric. It is about our way of living in each sphere, that we are able to produce that much that we are able to fulfill our own needs, and we have some surplus also. So in Punjab also, what I have observed in last 2.5 years, there is that skill, but that skill is not valued anymore because the social structure is broken. There is a disconnection with our immediate environment. So there are women who can spin, who can weave, but all these women are in their old age. They are like 60 years, 70 years, and some are 80 years old. So this younger generation is not taking it up. And for them, it becomes a monotonous and tedious work. And the idea of economic prosperity that green revolution also brought in, So do we only want economic prosperity? I think we need to question it to ourselves. What about the other values in life? Being a satisfied person, there are needs and wants. So first, can we identify our needs? So all this thing goes back to the British Raj and how we have got these ideas and these perspectives in our mind. So at this moment, I feel our villages are an independent unit. And if we relook our villages, there is a lot. There are huge possibilities, and we will get to know about ourselves also.
Great, great, amazing. And I think it's important to note that during the fight for British independence, Gandhi and the larger Khadi or Swadeshi movement, or Made in India, was rooted in burning British-made goods, and it returned to self-reliance, the village economy, this ruralization of our economies and not depending on those factors. I'm going to fast forward a bit because Dr. Shiva and Rupsi Garg, you have both pointed to the Green Revolution a lot in what you've talked about this far. So fast forward to the 1960s and 1970s, a critical juncture in India's agriculture sector was the Green Revolution. And Dr. Shiva, for those that are not familiar, can you give a brief overview of what the Green Revolution was, for its benign name, and what its impacts were that were not so green?
So, there was no green politics at that time. The word green did not mean ecology. Green was just a different color from red. And the Americans were very scared of red. So they just wanted a different name. The Green Revolution was not green. It was not revolutionary. It was basically an attempt being made ever since the wars ended to take war chemicals. The chemical fertilizers were basically made in the same labs and same factories in which the explosives were made. The same IG Farben made nitrogen fertilizers and made explosives, and the same process. All of the pesticides are derivatives of xylon B and poison gases that were made again for Hitler's concentration camps and for the wars. So after the wars were ended, instead of just folding up and saying we'll shut these factories, they had got so addicted to making huge money. And Rachel Carson has written about it in her book, Silent Spring. Albert Howard has written about it in his book, An Agricultural Testament, that those who had got addicted to making money out of selling chemicals continued to sell them now as agri-chemicals. So the big issue was they wanted to sell fertilizers and chemicals. The problem was, satyagraha is Gandhi's word for non-cooperation based on truth. And when chemicals were applied to our native varieties of seeds, which were tall, because they were dual purpose, the straw gave food for the animals and the grain gave food for us. So we created dual purpose animals, milk from the cows and animal energy from the bullocks, and dual purpose crops to feed the animals, including human animals. But when you apply chemicals to these tall crops, they lodge if there's wind or too much rain. And this problem of lodging was the big problem. So they kept trying, Ford Foundation, Rockefeller Foundation, And then Norman Borlaug, who worked for DuPont Defense Lab, was put on the job of changing the plant to adapt to the chemicals rather than adapt the farming techniques to the native seeds. And that's why he created the dwarf varieties. And these dwarf varieties were misleadingly called high-yielding varieties. How can less be more? You know? And when I did my Green Revolution book, my eyes would tell me, here's a lie, but my science will tell me, bigger lie. These were not high-yielding variety. They were high chemical demanding varieties, high response varieties, but they needed 10 times more water to grow the same amount of food. And that's the root of the water crisis of Punjab, for which the farmers are being blamed, but it was imposed on them. There were conditionalities put. If you couldn't show you had taken chemicals, you couldn't take a loan to send your daughter to college. Credit conditionalities on the farmer, and on India, credit conditionalities from the World Bank. All of this also meant these short varieties came with mechanization, and just the top of the grain was picked up by the harvester, and the stubble was left, and they told the farmer, burn the stubble. And now they told the farmer, use your water, use the chemicals. They told the farmer, burn the stubble, and now they want to fine farmers 20 million rupees each for doing what they were told to do. So one of the demands of the farmers right now is this should not be criminalized. So the Green Revolution, what did it end up doing? And it was prescribed by the World Bank. It was conditionality. 65, we had a drought. The prices of wheat went up slightly. And those days we used to, under rupee payment, import a little extra wheat from US. It was called the PL40. And Lal Bahadur Shastri asked for a little more wheat to stabilize prices. No one was dying of hunger and famine. There was no famine in India in 65. I was in school and I remember. Prices rose up. Sugar was a problem. And the US said, sorry, we won't send you wheat unless you change your agriculture and use chemicals. And Shastri said, I will not experiment with such a large agrarian population. We can do it on a small scale, and if it works, we'll adopt it. And then Lal Bahadur Shastri died in Tashkent, the pressure continued, and the Green Revolution was imposed. By 91, we had structural adjustment because the debt of the Green Revolution for dams, for irrigation, for chemicals, for the whole system. Now, actually, the system that was created was only Punjab. If you think of it, Aditi, so during British time, the Punjab farmers refused to become serfs and stayed owner cultivators. By the time Green Revolution came, they said, we got to build on the best because this wasn't a destroyed agriculture. And then they started to destroy it. And as a result of that, by 1984, the farmers of Punjab resisting. 84 was a peasant movement. The narrative was changed, but it was a farmers' movement. And the farmers were saying, and I have it written here, the Shiromani, there was a declaration, I think the Gurmat Khasla said, if the hard-earned income of the people or the natural resources of any nation or region are forcibly plundered, the goods produced by them are paid at arbitrarily determined prices, while the goods bought by them are sold at high prices. And in order to carry this process of economic exploitation to its logical conclusion, the human rights of people or of a nation are crushed, then these are indices of slavery of that nation, region, or people. Today, the 6 are shackled by chains of slavery. This type of slavery is thrust upon the states and 80% of India's population of poor people and minority. And we mustn't forget, my mother herself became a refugee. She had studied in Lahore and was working in Lahore, and then the partition happened. The partition left only Sikh farmers. Earlier, there used to be a mixture because of the Sikhs moved this side and the Muslims moved that side. So the farmers of Punjab are Sikhs. And they communalized the farmers' protests. And every narrative, if you look at it, 84 story is never told in terms of the farmers. 4th of June, the farmers of Punjab are going to blockade the supply of grain to Delhi. They had blockaded the governor's house. They were going to blockade the trains. So the Green Revolution brought 84. Then the 91 is a build-up of the new reforms, and maybe we can come back to that on another round. I can quickly tell you that 30% of the debt of 91, the 90 billion debt, was caused by the Green Revolution. And that then started to push new reforms, they call it, yeah, which is basically create a crisis, use it as an opportunity to expand your control and your market. And I want to show you just two images. So in 2000, I did a public hearing on farmer suicides. This was in Bangalore. This is a Sikh farmer who had come, whose brother has committed suicide because of debt. And that's not all. In 2006, this is still in my heart. I still carry this pain. You know, usually in Punjab, everyone's with a colorful turban, and all the women are in colorful chunnis. This is all white. 2,000 widows in a Gurdwara in Bhatinda, giving evidence to us. We were on a jury, a public jury of a public trial, 2,000 widows. And all of them said, and then he took the spray, as a spray kehte hain, you know, in Punjabi, a spray, yeah, the poison spray. They took the spray that got them into debt for the BT cotton. They were all BT cotton farmers. Vidarbha suicides, Bhatinda suicides, all connected through the poison cartel. And what we are seeing on the streets of Delhi or all over the country today with the Bharat Bandh is a continuation of this exploitation. And to me, this is genocide. I've said it, I've been trolled by the Monsantos of the world. But when you deliberately harm a community, and farmers are a community, and you cause harm to the extent that 400,000 of them have to commit suicide, this is genocide, and it has to stop. And I hope your networks will play their role to create another economy through a new solidarity.
Thank you, Dr. Shiva. I want to pivot to you, Nishanth. You said you grew up in Tamil Nadu, where your parents had a large textile factory, and you saw the adverse effects of industrial manufacturing, from polluted rivers, smog, infertility rates to cancer. When you returned from college abroad, you decided you wanted to change this. So I would love for you to talk about how Oshadi is reimagining the supply chain, one, to be more equitable, and if you could talk on specific issues like contract farming and how you've imagined a full supply chain, that would be great. You're muted.
So yeah, when I got back from the university, that was the first time, you know, I become serious. You know, before I go, I was like 17 years old, and you know, I was a bit childish. So I get back 22. I just look at the textile industry, and I actually did a big course on sustainability while I was at the university. And I came back and I looked at through my educational perspective. And I realized how biased the world is. Like, you know, especially humans, they have like different ways of looking at things. So when they look at their own child, you know, they have a completely different outlook on things. And when they look at someone else, and I saw so many rivers were polluted. I read that every 13th person in my hometown has cancer or likely to get cancer. And the biggest businesses here are like the infertility clinics. And I also saw like how a government or like an organization decides what a minimum wage is, and they end up paying like $250 to a farmer. When you pay 250 rupees to a farmer, it's like 7,500 rupees a month, which is, what can you do with 7,500 rupees a month? Like, you barely get through your life, you barely pay your rents, you barely eat good food. How can you, like in India, education is not, you know, monetized by government, healthcare is not. So they definitely need to save up something. I was just like so disturbed by this biased look of this world on, you know, different groups of people, like a certain segment of people just controlling thousands and thousands of workers, you know, deciding what a minimum wage for them is, or deciding, you know, how they could be polluted. And I was just so surprised that, you know, government has not criminalize this pollution of rivers, which is why, like, you see thousands and thousands of fishes like dead, and, you know, all this like poultry, millions and millions of chickens, you know, in one small space. And I was just like really disturbed for a couple of years, and I was really furious about this. And I decided that I think it's enough of complaining, and maybe start like a small impact, even if it's tiny. At least I played my part in doing that. And we started firstly working with the artisans and finding out like a new income level. So we used to also work with like a lot of brands, and the system, the rate, like when we started doing the farming, we figured out the rates for different things like the farm, the sowing, the thing. All the rates are completely like low. I can't believe like government like says it's 280 rupees is a minimum wage. Like I just because a privileged person has the right to decide that doesn't mean that's like a right system. So I just realized the entire system was like completely screwed. It's just like wrong things are being taught through the system, like through spending, through farmers. Like a farmer is earning 250 bucks, like we pay them 350 rupees, which is really low, like compared to what our standards are. But if you take it like higher, brands won't buy stuff from it. The current rates for a farmer are like 200 bucks, 225 rupees a day. And it's just like, how can you get through life? Like without 1,000 rupees a day, you can't get through life. You can't save up something for your kids' education. The kids then become like recluse when they grow up without parents, like, taking care of them. They come out as rebels, not rebels with like, with a cause, but they just come and destroy things. And, like, it's just like, it's a cause and effect. And we started working with like brands, and we figured out a supply chain. We made our own rates. We didn't look at the system, what the rates were. We worked backward. We saw like how much the farmers, how much would they work to get this income. And then we finalized the cotton rate based on what the yield was. So the cotton rate, how can it be consistent? Let's say you have one season of drought, how can the cotton rates still be the same? It just doesn't make sense. And we realized, okay, we go backward, we figure out how many meters of fabric does a brand want, and then we go backwards from that, then just have an estimate saying that, hey, we would do like 10 acres and you'd have this many meters of fabric, but that is not guaranteed. It can be 20% up, 20% lesser, 20%, it could be anything. But that's the thing you get into. That's kind of a system we can get into and figure things out. And fortunately, we had brand partners who support us to make that happen. And that way we just change the rates. So all the seamstresses who work with us, they get like at least 1,000 rupees a day. All the weavers who work with us, they get the similar wages, like 1,000 rupees. I don't think anywhere, like I've visited so many handloom places around India, like in Gujarat, in Vidarbha, in like all the income rates. Like I see so many brands working with artisanal companies. Like they've been working with these companies for 50 years, like 100 years. And why is the artisan still poor? Like, why is he still in the hut? Like, why can't he afford like right education for his kids? Or, why does he? So it's the system's based on like suppressing, like, making slaves, and it's like colonization, as you said. And I think Indians themselves, like, going through this process, have come to a colonized mindset where now it's Indians colonizing Indians, just like through businesses or through systems or the rates and all these government policies and things like that.
Yeah, and you pointed to the fact that, farmers are expected to create a certain yield, but farmers are often picking up all of the risk, especially in an age where weather conditions, and there's so many conditions that they're faced with. So I know you have a model where brands actually lease the land from the farmers, if I'm not mistaken. Can you speak to that a bit?
Yeah, so as I said just before, we work with brands, we figure out what is the kind of fabric they would want to make, or what is the type of garment they would want to make. And then it's just an estimate of what the general quantities are. So we have an agreement with the brand saying that, hey, this is the quantity, but it can go up or go down based on the yields. And a lot of the farms are like chemically farmed. So, it takes like a few years for it to switch into organic farms. So the yield might go down for a year or two, or sometimes the yield is like fantastic in first year because there's already existing salts from before. And, the second time it goes here. So, the brands we were fortunate to have it, like Christy Dawn, they realized they were okay. We never gave them a base price or, base, like this is it. We told them this is what it would take to change the land. This is what it takes to have cover crops, intercrops, pollinator strips. And all of these things are part of regenerative farming. But basically, when you just look at those things, regenerative farming is traditional Indian farming thing. So the model we had was from this person who used to work for Namalwar. And like this person, he gave us a model, and I was looking at like, hey, there's like green gram there, or there's this castor on the outside, or there's jawar on as a border crop, or this is as like a pollinator strip. And I was like so surprised. I was like, it has such close similarity, and it is, you know, regenerative farming. And as Vandana ji just said, like, you know, you have these like tall crops, they act as like food for the cattle here, and you know the top part of it, like the jar, act like food for the parrots or like the birds which come in, so they don't come and pluck into the cotton plants. And you know there's this insects, and they feed on these cover crops and trap crops. And you know it's small ecosystem you create, like, you know, through, we have like something called life fencing, where like, you know, we create fences not with barbed wires but with these like trees which are like really closely planted. And you see like this entire thing, and we never like, since we started doing that, we actually have less or no pest attack whatsoever. We have like really minimal maintenance and really less water levels, like, you know, water requirement for these things. But yeah, this is the setup we had for the farm.
That's brilliant. And I think it really speaks to the fact that, you know, we've seen the rise of this narrative of regenerative agriculture, which is great. But I think it's also really important to note that we are not reinventing the wheel when it comes to the growing movement around sustainability. Sustainability at its core is going back and following the lead of cultures and practices that have always had a symbiotic relationship with this earth. Being mindful of the time, this panel is flying by. It would be remiss of me not to acknowledge what is currently happening in India with the farmer protests, which is now being called the largest organized strike in the history of the world, with over 250 million participants. And so currently, farmers across India are protesting 3 agricultural bills. These bills promise liberalizations, but in reality, farmers will face the privatization of the agricultural sphere. There is a lot of resources online that one can read into if you're interested in learning more, because again, want to be mindful of time. But Dr. Shiva, as someone who has been an ardent supporter of small farmers as the key to sustainability and biodiversity, and you've been a champion against the corporatization of this sphere and corporate monopoly, what are your thoughts on the current situation, and where do we go from here?
One, I've just put my analysis that I did for a newspaper on the 3 laws, as well as the books and some videos of the 90s and the protests of the earlier days, where the fathers and grandfathers of those who are leading the protests today used to march with us. 500,000 farmers in Bangalore at Cubbon Park, 200,000. You know, right now, Rakesh Tiketh is on the streets, but his dad, Mahendra Singh Tiketh, used to be with us, and 200,000 at Red Fort, to say to the government that agriculture is too precious. It's about culture, it's about life, it's about food, it's about livelihood. It is not about trade in commodities. Now, the 3 laws were actually, the substance of these were crafted by the World Bank as part of the structural adjustment of 1991. World Bank has been trying very hard to get rid of the Essential Commodities Act, which we put in place in 1955 after the Great Bengal Famine of 42, which killed 2 million people. And it's all because the British were extracting and hoarding and trading and commodifying. People had grown the rice, there was enough rice, but 2 million people died because the British took the rice to make profits during those periods. And the women started a movement called Tebhaga. The second law, so it's being dismantled, you know, it's been changed to say you can hoard, you can profit, and the government won't set a price unless it becomes such a crisis. But if it's a crisis, then you can't really do anything about it. The second is dismantling the system that allowed to market their grain. Now, let me take you back to the Green Revolution. Here's the Green Revolution that says Punjab will grow grain for everyone else, and it will only be rice and wheat. And rice is not a Punjab crop, but they were forced to grow rice. And now it should supply the whole country. 40% of the supply of food of India today, especially the public distribution system, is now grown by the farmers. Now, this grain had to be brought somewhere so the government could pick it up and supply it around the country. These were called the mandis. So the current act is in effect trying to hand over the trade to the giant corporations. The difference between 91, when the big corporations were the Cargills for grain and the Monsantos, the difference is today we have our own giants who all have partnership with global giants. They don't work alone. I mean, suddenly out of the blue, a Reliance cannot become a digital company without the help of Microsoft and Gates. They cannot become a grain company, or Adani can't become a grain company overnight. So they're becoming the front, just like when Monsanto entered, they entered behind Mahiko. They always find an Indian partner to hide behind. And the current protests are against the third law. So one is dismantling of the Essential Commodities Act, which means totally deregulated prices and a recipe for famine. This doesn't affect the farmer as much as the country and the poor. The second is dismantling the regional system where states decided, and there were cooperatives of farmers and small traders, and there was a stock limit that goes and the big giants can go by. But the third is the contract law. Now, all these three they've been trying to put in place since 91, but I always smile at the COVID, the little virus. I say so many racketeers hid behind you, COVID, to do things they could not do when democracy was vibrant. But the beauty of the protest today is, in spite of the lockdown, millions of farmers have shown how a vibrant democracy can look. So how did the contract farming begin? This will be interesting to you, Aditi, that it actually began back again with the crisis of Punjab. And here's the ad that our dear Pepsi put. What did they call it? Today, Punjab has the promise of 100 years of spring on Baisakhi Day. They started to try and get in from 86 onwards. The crisis is 84, 86 they try. They're given approval in 88. The entire system is changed for multinational entry. A new ministry is created for food processing. And to understand what farmers are against, let me give you a figure of Pepsi. So all of Pepsi's projects and contracts totally failed in Punjab. We've done many studies on this. They brought potato and they brought tomato. They'd pay farmers of Punjab 50 paisa. Farmers couldn't survive. And then they'd collect 10 rupees from the government to export ketchup. And they weren't allowed to enter in the name of Lays. They used to call it Leher in those days because of some restrictions. Potato, they moved out of Punjab, but they went all over. Their suicides among farmers of potato, locked into contract with Pepsi. Pepsi makes you pay 20 rupees for a junk food package. Farmer gets 0.04 rupees, 4 paise for the potato in that junk food package. And then they tried to sue. I was part of writing the laws for India. I worked with Parliament on the patent law. The agriculture minister invited me to draft the farmers' rights law. We are the only country in the world that has a law, the Plant Variety Protection and Farmers' Rights Act. And we put a clause, Article 39, that farmers are breeders, therefore, and their right to save, exchange, improve, sell seed can never be taken away. Pepsi sued 4 potato farmers of Gujarat last year for 40 million rupees. I sent this book to the lawyers and the judges, the book which has these laws, and Pepsi had to withdraw that case. But the farmers are totally rightfully rejecting these laws, and they keep saying that farmers are afraid. Farmers are afraid. No, farmers have experienced since 1991 the corporate hijack of their share of what the consumer pays, whether it's in clothing or it's in food. And they also know that if this down, and the prices have gone like this, with globalization, the price the farmer gets is going like this, the price the consumer pays goes up. And the Arab Spring was actually a bread riot because the food prices had jumped up. Now, farmers know if this system of deregulated commerce is pushed and no regulation is there, these prices are going to collapse and they won't be able to survive. And they're fighting for survival. And I'm totally behind them because this, I say, is a fight for the soul of India. It is a fight for the civilization and its values that has consciously stayed agrarian in spite of repeated attempts to dismantle our agrarian soul and leave us both desertified in terms of the soil and desertified in terms of our soul. So we are in a very, very critical juncture. And I've seen too many tricks played over these decades of work I've been doing. And I just hope all the strength stays with the farmers who have shown their strength so long. And they continue to say it's either yes to our demand of repeal the laws or a no, in which case we will not go home till you repeal the laws.
Incredibly powerful. And I have a call to action for the audience is amid this age of corporate monopoly and corporate hegemons and how all of that ties into media, please amplify what is currently happening on the ground in India on your platforms if you can. I feel like a repetitive theme throughout this conversation was this intersection between culture, identity, and ecological sustainability. Rupsi, when I first came across your work with Kheti Virisat Mission, it was through a documentary that they had put out. You could find the link in the chat about Trinjan. And I am a Punjabi woman, and despite being a part of the diaspora, one thing that had always connected me to my culture was growing up learning about bolis and giddas, the songs, the dance, the folklore that frame our relationship to the land, to womanhood, to each other. And so I would love if you could briefly talk about the work of Trinjan and how that is tied to Khadi, as well as the movement for organic farming in Punjab.
Yeah, so as it was talked earlier about the BT cotton. So in Faridkot, we are in Malwa belt of Punjab. And this Malwa belt was known as cotton belt. And now this cotton is replaced by paddy. And there are a lot of suicides in this cotton belt. Bathinda, Muktsar, Fazilka, Faridkot, Barnala. All these districts come under this cotton belt, because in the cotton, a lot of pesticides and chemical fertilizers are used. And where the consumption of pesticides and fertilizers are high, the suicides are also high. So this area was known for cotton cultivation. And that cotton cultivation was not just restricted to the farmers, that it is being produced and it is sold, but it had a complete value chain after cotton production. It was manually picked, it was ginned, it was carded, it was hand spun in the houses, and almost every houses had a charkha, a loom, and its after processing. So when we started identifying all these links, we found that there is a great heritage that we don't know about. So when I came to KVM, I started talking to women, because Kheti Virasat Mission works with 5,000 women through organic kitchen gardening. Organic kitchen gardening is a project or is an initiative that talks about nutritional and health security at the household level. Because we all know without women, any family, any society, any nation is incomplete. So this organic farming movement is also incomplete without women. So women have to get involved. And due to green revolution and its consequences, which is high mechanization, machinery, and market, women did not find much space, especially in Punjab. In other parts of the country, there are women working in farms. They are farmers. But in Punjab, it is not the case. So how to bring women back? So through organic kitchen gardening, we could bring women back, and they cultivate organic seasonal vegetables in their houses. So they are conserving their own seeds also, vegetable seeds. That is how seed conservation, seed heritage is also preserved. And when I started talking to these women, then they said, we used to do all these things in our houses. And all these daris are rugs that are made for the daughters when daughters get married. So they used to make 9 daris, 11 daris, 15 daris for their daughters. And each of these daris has a name, in Punjabi. So whatever they saw in their surrounding, be it a parrot, be it a chidiya, be it a tree. And they even made a bride and groom on that dari. So it is their imagination and it is their creativity. So what I have started feeling, that women don't just produce, they create, they make creations, you know. So all these things made me think about my internal journey. I am also a woman. So what it means to be a woman, how we maintain our relationships, what I have the responsibilities, being a daughter, being a sister, and maybe being a wife. I'm going to become tomorrow. So all these things made a connect with the culture, with the relationships, and we call Trinjan is weaving the social fabric with compassionate warmth and dedicated web. I repeat it, it is not just about the production. It is not just making yarn and fabric and selling it. Yeah, it is an opportunity for employment, but more than the employment, it is about the social warp and weft, जो समाज का ताना बाना है. See, our society is also closely woven, closely knitted, and we have our values, our customs, our rituals, so many things in that. So Trinjan talks about weaving that social fabric with compassionate warmth and dedicated web, because it is not just the crisis of farming, not about the art, it is a civilizational crisis. It is a crisis of our identity, our existence. So how do we first understand it and then address it? So traditional art and craft and its revival was the starting point for Trinjan. And organic cotton, we found a backbone where we started from. And then these women artisans, because they talk about the womanhood, their challenges and struggles in life, and how they manage all these things around them. So Trinjan is a platform where people can come together. It is not just specific to women, because at the moment we are working with women, so that is why it is coming again and again. But we are trying to work with children, with younger generation also, who are interested. So Trinjan becomes a platform where people can come together. They can share their happiness, their sorrowness, whatever they want to share, and it goes to the next generation. Because earlier we did not have these schools, any coaching centers where our children would go and learn. All this knowledge was getting transferred in the household itself. Where a mother is weaving, her daughter would also start weaving. And now also when Trinjan started, we could see that small kids, 8-year-old, 9-year-old, they have started weaving and they are making small daris, you know, they are making a jugaad, they are arranging something from here and there. So initially we heard from people that we burnt our charkha because it was just a piece of wood. It was not symbolizing anything else. And when we asked about the loom, they said we sold it to a kabadi wala because there is a iron frame for that loom. So you can see that this disconnect and that disassociation with our own things, what we should value, what is precious to us, and nowadays what has come to it, what has it become. So all these things are crucial to us, and in Trinjan we are trying to emphasize the intrinsicness. Okay, there is an external value also, there is an aesthetic, there is marketing aspect, there is employment aspect, but what a charkha and a loom can give you internally. Here I would like to talk about a person. His name is Baba Ronki Ramji. He is from Jalandhar district, near LPU Fagwada. There is a village. I am not remembering his village name. He is 71 years old and he is from a traditional Julaha family. Julaha means a weaver family. And we got to know about him. We went to meet him. And when I asked him, what is weaving for you? You know what he replied? मेरे लिए वीविंग प्रभु का नाम लेना है. मतलब weaving is worshipping the god. It is not just making a fabric and something like that. So he is the only weaver left in that village. So we are trying to connect those dots that are still existing. Okay, we have lost everything, that is fine, but what we have, let's preserve it, let's collect its seeds. When the right time will come, it will be able to grow, germinate and spread. So through Trinjan, we are trying to connect all these things.
Rupsi, that is so beautiful. And I think it speaks to so many things. This is not just about the charkha or the spinning wheel. This is about culture, a way of life. You know, when you do the spinning wheel, it's inherently meditative. And the way it was done was usually in a communal way. So it was a form of knowledge transfer, as you spoke about. And I think that is also powerful. Nishanth, I know that you are very passionate about correcting the industry's narrative around Indian artisans. A lot of the narrative around India, especially in the sustainable fashion scene, has been about rescuing people. So I'd love your thoughts on how you are kind of using Oshadi Collective and your work at large to kind of change that narrative.
I think everyone around the world knows India has exceptional craftsmanship. All the luxury brands, ready-to-wear brands around the world, like, you know, most of their work relies on Indian embroiders or like craftsmen, and you know, it never goes out, like, you know, it's never told as a true story. And you know, when someone's working, like, I know organizations like Harris Tweed in the UK and many more organizations in France, and when they speak about the work there, they speak about, oh, exceptional craftsmanship, and this, it takes so much time to weave that. It probably takes more time to weave that in India, you know, because they make more intricate work here. And when they put Indian work in the limelight, it comes out as like helping a poor person, or, you know, like supporting like a person, or helping someone, or sympathizing with that. And I completely was dismayed by the sympathizing thing, you know, when they looked at me, or like when they looked at an artisan, that, hey, we are like helping you. And I was like, no, you're not helping us. We are working together, like we are partnering, and we are helping you, you are helping us. It's an exchange. And it's not like someone, you know, it's just like a completely different perspective. It shouldn't come out of sympathy. It has to come out of compassion. And the work that artisans do, like, one of the best works, and all the embroideries, all the stuff, you know, we've been doing, it's always taken in the, you know, in the wrong limelight. And through Oshadi, we always wanted to show that it's not sympathizing with the artisan, is the skill, you know, like, you know, I'm able to sit here and speak to you guys, or, you know, there's another brand making millions of dollars on another side of the world, or, you know, it doesn't come from sympathy. It comes from hard work. It comes from skills, and it comes from respect for all those skills, and, you know, not showing a downside. You see like photos, like everyone, all the brands most brands who work with them, they show like photos of these poor people wearing no shirts, or like, you know, just coming in and, you know, giving a helping hand, and, you know, things like that. I think the perspective has to change. It has to be like connecting with each other instead of helping, or like partnering or collaborating with each other, and, you know, coming together as one, looking at everyone as like, not just having like a biased outlook. I think humans tend to have such biased outlook. When they look at others, they look at someone who's not wearing a shirt, or like who's just doing his work in his own way. I think with Oshadi, I actually, like, you know, when I sit down in most of like if you go to India and sit down in anyone's household on a dining table, you wouldn't see like a worker or like a cook sitting on the same table and having lunch, or like a driver, like he would just stand outside and he won't have the lunch. And this is like deeply troubling issue. You know, it's feeded into subconscious of kids when they grow up. You know, I probably learned that. And, you know, when I go abroad and come back, and I was like, man, this is so wrong. Like, you know, there's someone who's not able to sit on the same table, and she cooks food 3 times a day. She's working 16 hours a day to keep the home clean, or, you know, to have like good food. And I think like I was like really disturbed by this biased outlook. Actually, like I listened to a podcast. I heard this story about this rat. I keep telling this story, you know, repeating this, where this parent, this family has a white rat as a pet, and they take care of it like really well. And, you know, when the rat grows old and it passes away, the family mourns, and they're deeply sad about that. And a few years down the line, it's about the same family, and they see a rat, like, you know, eating on their cheese or something, and they kill the rat. So you see that perspective, like, it's the same rat. It's just like a rat because they have like raised, or, they've had as a pet. They take care of it. They mourn the dead. They, have the ceremony, like they bury it and stuff. And when they see another rat, they try to kill it. So I think that kind of biased outlook is what I personally, I work towards empowering that, or like, not just empowering that, but telling it in the right way, and honest way, and in real way, than, in like a facade or sympathizing things.
I love that. And everyone needs to check out Oshadi Collective. From the way they are weaving this narrative to the visuals, I think it provides a very powerful example of what decolonized storytelling looks like, that isn't rooted in this predatory gaze that reinforces certain power structures. Again, being mindful of time, I'm going to ask our last question for you, Dr. Shiva. And that is about, again, we're at this critical juncture between COVID-19, the farmer protests. I think 2020 in many ways was the year where it has become more explicit than ever that our systems are not working for both people and the planet. So to close, I would love if you could share your insights on how the future of an equitable society rooted in sustainability requires a decolonization, which means we're going to go back to this intersection between ecology, culture, identity. So what are your parting words of advice for everyone in this space of how we can move forward between all of those intersections?
I never give advice. It's a bit too arrogant to give other people advice. But what I've learned through my life is, first, from my quantum theory days, there's nothing like things. People are not things. Fabric is not thing. Food is not stuff. Everything has the potential to be living and the giver of life. And everything is inseparable. We are all interconnected. I've done a recent book on this called Oneness versus the 1%. It's available from Chelsea Green in the United States and from Women Unlimited in India and other publishers around the world. What I see happening is, my analysis of COVID is, you invaded into the forest, you've unleashed pandemic after pandemic because you've robbed animals of their homes, and their viruses, which were safe in the forest and on animals, are now becoming epidemic diseases, from the Ebolas to the HIVs to the SARS, and now the COVID. So it is really a symptom of a relationship gone wrong with the earth. And this is how we have to address it, except that those who made a lot of money out of the mechanical mind and extractivist economy can't give up that habit very easily. In a way, it's, I think it's like an addiction, and they do need de-addiction. For me, decolonization is de-addiction to colonizing. And they're now looking for every opportunity to colonize more. My book, Oneness versus 1%, and a recent report we've done on Gates to a Global Empire, is that here are all these initiatives rising that we have shared this evening. I'm so happy. Namalwar was a dear, dear friend, and we built the organic movement of India together. And Umendra Dutt, who started Kheti Virisat, volunteered with Navdanya for many, many, many years. And for those who want to know more about Navdanya, I have put the link to the courses we offer, because I realize that this 36 years of learning from the earth and learning from the farmers and sharing in compassion is what is needed today for this de-addiction. So what are the Gates and the Monsantos and the Bayers thinking of now? Farming without farmers and food without food. And of course, they created clothing without clothing, all that fake material that is now microparticles in the ocean and the fish and pollution everywhere. So we cannot escape. There is no other, and there is no other place where you can dump your pollution. Eventually, it comes back. And therefore, a systems thinking of non-separation and interconnectedness is the beginning of how to build sustainability. And once you take that step, you realize that sustainability and justice and dignity and identity are all one continuum. For me, identity is not something someone else gives you, but identity is what grows from your life, from your work, from your sense of place, from your sense of belonging. And that's why we always talk of Desh. You know, when we save seeds in Navdanya, we talk about Desi seeds of the place. Identity grows from the earth. And my work on earth democracy has talked about how the Huntington said, I cannot know who I am unless I know who I hate. And America is overtaken by this, where everyone has a sense of identity based on hate and not knowing who you are, but knowing who you hate. Knowing who you are means you have to know you're part of the earth, you're an earth citizen, you're part of an earth family. Knowing who you are means you have to know the relationships that sustain you. And these are the relationships of gratitude. And knowing who you are has to know, you have to know deep within you, what is the Tana and Mana that weaves your soul and your spiritual being. So we are at this moment where we could see extinction fast forward and dehumanization fast forward, or a new rising of our humanity, realizing we are one humanity with lots of diversity on one planet with lots of diversity. So it's an exciting moment to be living through, and each of us has a contribution to make.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. So before I pivot into the questions, I just wanted to note that State of Fashion will be having what they call a therapy session coming up. I will have Renee add more details in the chat if folks are enjoying what they're listening to and want to engage in more conversations in the near future. I am going to look at the questions now. And so the first one is, okay, so the first question is for all three panelists, and that is, what are some specific things that you need now that can help with your work? What is any sort of, any help, any connections that can help you each in your work? Nishanth, would you like to start?
I mean, it's just working together, and I don't think we need any help at the moment in any way, but if someone would like to be a part of our work and facilitate that, it'd be amazing to have more partners in this. I think that's about it.
Dr. Shiva and Rupsi, I'll open up to you as well if you have any requests or things to share with the audience.
Well, you know, since I started saving seeds walking on my 2 feet, we've created 150 community seed banks, including Debel Deb, who actually started with Navdanya. We've saved 4,000 varieties of rices, but there's always need for more seed saving so that farmers have more seed sovereignty, because all the debt begins with the seed. The dwarf varieties of Punjab to the GMOs of today, and with seed you begin with decolonizing the seed, you can decolonize agriculture. So we want to create more seed banks. We definitely want, we've trained 1 million farmers or more on ecological regenerative agriculture, organic farming. And we want to make sure that in a decade, all of India is poison free, all of India is suicide free, all of India is malnutrition free. So of course, Navdanya is a trust, any contribution that can be made, but most important is to walk the journey. That's why I put the courses we offer, because we have to walk this journey together, as Nishanth said, as partners, as earth citizens, loving the earth and sowing seeds of hope.
Through Trinjan, we are trying to work on this complete value chain from cotton to yarn to fabric. So there are various aspects that are covered: socio-cultural, ecological, and economic factors. So considering all these factors, if somebody would like to volunteer, somebody would like to help us in working with the artisans, maybe in infrastructure, designing, understanding them, what skill we already have, what resources we already have, how do we make good use of it. So connecting all those links, if we can get some help, that would be great.
Beautiful. I think we have 1 minute, so I'm going to ask the last question, which I think is a wonderful one. Nishanth, you briefly touched upon this, which is the idea of India not being a homogenous notion of culture, especially when it comes to caste. The question is, how can we make sense of the idea of caste when thinking about decolonization in the Indian context? What we call bias is indeed deeply ingrained in our society, which plays into the neo-colonial narrative we are being confronted with. How can we be aware of this when talking about this issue?
I think like avoiding the caste, I think you just have to stand up against this. And a lot of times, a lot of people don't have courage because, you know, it's difficult to do it with your family systems, or difficult to do it within the systems you're bound with. Like, for example, some other farmers who we work with, you know, they don't drink tea from another community of farmers. And we just do it. We are like, if you want to work here, this is it. Like, you know, you have to drink this tea, or you can find another place where you find a better tea there, you know, like it's so ingrained. Like, can you imagine? It's gone so deeply down the thing. And I always think like a lot of people just don't stand up against this because, you know, they don't want to be against like these systems, or it's just like standing your ground, standing to your values. And no matter what you have ahead, like, you know, you might have to be twice as tall or like maybe more taller, you know, to fight against this. But I think everyone needs to start taking the ground, and that's what I think that's the only solution. There's no like nothing deep. I think the solution is really simple, and everyone just needs to start adopting it. They just like sit down like, hey, I'm gonna have the same. It's just like having food on the same table with a person, and like, you know, who you normally know. Normally the people won't have that. Like in India, I don't really know how it's over there, but in India, it's so common not to like just sit down with people you work with and have lunch on the same table. And even doing that, like, it's not about caste or something, but it kind of like subconsciously starts feeding it into people's mind that, hey, like, you know, you come from the same place and you go down to the same place, you know.
Dr. Shiva?
Yeah, quickly. First of all, you know, our freedom movement was an anti-caste movement. And my parents, my mother, very active in the freedom movement, and they adopted the name Shiva to erase caste. As insecurities have grown and polarization has grown, this polarization has become very, very political. But my father used to tell me that one of the reasons, you know, Buddha became the most important teacher, and Buddhism became the most important religion 2000 years ago. And then the Brahmins got panicky. So it's not that people, you know, every society has had different vocations, but they were horizontally linked, and they were chosen by birth. I want to be a warrior. I want to be a woodsmith. I want to be a blacksmith. And these were put into an hierarchy and frozen by birth by the Brahminical revival to crush Buddhism and Jainism that time. And that history is only known by the victims, as is always the case. So it's extremely important to know that the artisans of this country are the most important creative workers. They are the creative industry. And to bring their identity back through caste outside the stigma by birth and the hierarchy is our work. I've known many people who think caste, getting rid of caste is get rid of the work. The work was never degraded. It was the identity, it was the structure that degraded the good work. And Vivekananda has a very beautiful book. He says, only when the workers and the artisans rule, and because he was addressing the East India Company and as a trading company, says the rule of trade that they have brought has not just created inequality and aggravated inequality, it has actually created divisions. You know, the Hindu-Muslim problem was totally part of the divide and rule of the British Empire. 1857 onwards, that's what they did. And that is what we are still suffering. The partition was part of it, the 1905 Bengal partition was part of it, the Swadeshi movement began there. But most important is we have to realize that not only defending work, but defending the dignity of work, and with it, recognizing that the freedom to choose your work is the true decolonization, decolonizing our past, but also preventing the colonization of our future.
Beautiful. Thank you, Dr. Shiva. And thank you everyone so much for joining us this morning, this evening, wherever you are. To my three panelists, you are all schools. Thank you so much for your wisdom. I feel so honored to be in your presence and learning from you. If anyone is interested in learning more, again, there are a plethora of links in the chat, and you could find all of our panelists online as well. Thank you everyone so much.